My name is Cklara Moradian. I consider myself a spoken word artist, and I'm also a student. I study philosophy. It's my last year as an undergrad. Most of my poems are about women's rights, about the plight of the Iranian cause for freedom, for liberation, for the youth and what they're going through. It's also about different ethnic minorities, different religious minorities who don't have their freedom to practice their rights. It's also about certain practices like stoning, female stoning that still goes on in Iran, which is very barbaric. It's also about female genital mutilation, which is still practiced in the Middle East in certain villages, and it's really horrendous. And most people don't want to talk about it because it's very taboo. So through poetry and through portraying it in a very theatrical fashion, I tell those stories.
All your poems, they have such a strong message in them.
Mm-hmm.
What do you hope that people take away from these poems?
Like you said, they have a message. I want people to hear stories, things that they thought were fiction, and realize that that's reality. It's happening right now, or it happened to someone and it's still haunting that person. When someone is tortured or they were imprisoned, in some ways they're always mentally imprisoned. And unless there's justice and those people are punished or brought to just trials, not show trials, but just trials, they don't feel like they can be free. It is always so ironic to me that the person who was raped carries the shame. The person who was imprisoned, and then after their prison term is over, they still feel imprisoned. And yet the person who did the torture, the person who did the rape, they can walk around free. I want these stories to touch people in a way where they no longer stand for that. I am simply one child that was born into that system. And now I'm here and I have the ability to speak without being imprisoned. So I need to be that voice. And poetry is such a powerful way to do that.
You do us the honor of reading and performing one of your poems for us today.
Of course.
And which poem will you be reciting for us today?
Well, I'm going to do a piece called Fragmented Identity, a Tortured Cliche. Growing up the way I did, it does fragment your identity. But I'm not a tortured cliche, and by I mean people who grew up like me and people with my kind of history, Iranian people. I am a story. The year 1987, Evin 209. A solitary cell impregnated with a pregnant 18-year-old beauty. The first sounds I heard were those of her shouts as they threw her against the cemented walls of her cell. The second were whispered sounds of her sweet lullaby when she was left alone. The third were of strange men and women demanding in tongue for hours what she would not give away. The first thing I felt was fear as she was beaten on a long, thin wooden board. The second was worry as I clenched my newly formed fist, hoping she could feel that she is not alone. Then our tears came, streaming down, only that mine swam within the protection of the ocean of her womb. The first thing I tasted was starvation, as she was not fed for days. There was only the vacuum of her apologetic umbilical cord. The first nightmares I had was her sleep-deprived nights, as they bombarded her eardrums with the beating sounds of women and young girls being tortured and interrogated. The second was that of monstrous loudspeakers roaring the Quran for hours on end with no remorse. The first light I saw was the blinding darkness of being born into shackles. The first breath I inhaled was the pleasant scent of her on the floor, but it was the smell of her strength the guards gave her. Months in a tiny cell with no toilet, and she gave back a breathing, fighting, living being by herself. She is my mother, a prisoner of conscience. I was a fetus, nourished and formed by the tenacity and resilience, and swam out of her womb into love. I have since been conscious with her, and together we work for emancipation, for we will not be tied down to tyranny.
Rod Baharloo, Win Television, Los Angeles.